The room was too quiet for a normal morning. That was the first thing Daniel noticed the moment he stepped into the high-rise boardroom. Usually there was talk, soft jokes, someone pouring coffee. But today, nothing. Only the soft hum of the city outside and the cold echo of chairs, lined up for a meeting he never expected. He took a seat near the middle of the table, unaware that this would be the last time he sat there as part of the team he helped build. The sun was barely up, spilling thin silver light across the glass walls. It should have felt peaceful, but instead it felt like the calm before a storm. Then the door opened. Grant Morgan, the CEO, walked in with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. There was something stiff about it, like he was practicing it all morning. His suit was sharp, his steps confident, almost rehearsed. And the board members behind him avoided looking at Daniel. Altogether, that was the second sign something was wrong. Grant placed a folder on the table right in front of Daniel. He tapped it lightly, as if marking the end of something. "Daniel," he said with a voice too calm, "we're moving forward with the launch. Without you." For a moment, Daniel didn't respond. He blinked, certain he misheard. The launch? Without him? He had spent 4 years building Nimbus. He had written every line of code, tested every sensor, designed every function. The project was his whole life, the thing he stayed late for, the thing he skipped holidays for. And now, without warning, they were cutting him out? Grant continued talking, his tone polished and professional. As if this was a routine update. "The board feels new leadership will help the product shine," he said. Shine. That word felt like a slap. Daniel looked around the room. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. One cleared his throat. Another traced the edge of her phone. But none of them objected. None of them spoke up for the man who built the entire foundation they were standing on. It felt unreal. Like the ground was slipping from under him. He tried to speak, but Grant gently raised a hand as if comforting a child. "This isn't personal," Grant added. "It's just business." Daniel almost laughed. Not personal? Removing him from his own creation? Replacing the inventor at the finish line? He felt a slow burn in his chest, not loud anger, but something deeper. A quiet sting of betrayal that sank into him like ice. He gathered his things silently. The room stayed frozen. No one stopped him. No one explained. No one tried. As he reached the door, something hit him, a detail so important, so powerful, that the shock inside him shifted into something calmer. Something controlled. Grant didn't remember. The board didn't remember. Daniel owned the patent, not the company. Not the CEO, not the board. Him. Every idea, every page, every diagram registered under his name before the company ever existed. They couldn't launch Nimbus without him. They couldn't even show it without his approval. And that single truth sat in Daniel's mind like a spark waiting for oxygen. He walked out of the boardroom with steady steps, even as the world behind him tried to rewrite the story. They thought they could erase him quietly, replace him cleanly, push him aside and take the spotlight. They didn't realize they had just made the biggest mistake of their careers, because while Daniel left the room silently, what was coming next would be anything but silent, and deep down, he knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of something much bigger, something none of them were ready for. The story of how Daniel reached that boardroom didn't start in California. It began in a small town in Ohio. Quiet streets, friendly neighbors, and a garage that always smelled like metal and machine oil. That garage belonged to his father, and it was there, between old toolboxes and half-fixed radios, that Daniel first discovered what he loved most. Building things. As a kid, he wasn't the loud one. He wasn't the star athlete or the class comedian. He was the boy who sat in the corner, taking apart toys to see how they worked. The boy who carried a small notebook filled with sketches of ideas too big for his age. His mother used to joke that if something wasn't nailed down, Daniel would probably open it just to understand it. But he didn't just want to understand the world. He wanted to improve it. That quiet drive carried him through college. Engineering wasn't just a major for him, it was a calling. While his classmates rushed through assignments, Daniel lived in the lab, staying late enough that campus security knew him by name. And yet, for all his talent, he never imagined where it would take him. His life changed the day he met Grant Morgan. It was at a tech conference in Palo Alto. Daniel had traveled across the country with nothing but a small prototype, some printed diagrams and hope. Grant, however, was already making waves. Smooth talker, confident, always surrounded by a circle of people, eager to hear his next big idea. Their first conversation was simple. Grant noticed Daniel's prototype, picked it up and said, "Someone could build a company on this." It was the kind of line Grant used often, but for Daniel, it felt like recognition, something he didn't get much growing up. They began talking. Grant had ambition. Daniel had skill. A partnership formed almost naturally. Within months, Daniel moved to California. They worked out of a small rented office above a bakery, where the smell of fresh bread mixed with the hum of Daniel's machines. The early days were rough, long hours, tight budgets, but they believed they were building something meaningful. And in many ways, they were. Grant handled pitches, investors, and presentations. He knew how to turn ideas into excitement. And Daniel? He brought the ideas to life, piece by piece, day by day. Late night after late night. Via XTRO Tech began to grow. Slow at first, then faster. Investors called. Journalists wrote small features. The company moved from the tiny office above the bakery to a real tech space with glass walls and polished floors. But the real shift came when Daniel started working on something new. Something big. A project he named Nimbus. Nimbus wasn't just another gadget. It was what Daniel liked to call a future tool. A small, powerful device that could read air quality, measure environmental changes, and detect danger before it reached people. It had the potential to help firefighters, researchers, families, anyone who needed early warning. Grant loved it instantly. Investors loved it even more. And Daniel poured everything he had into it. But before Nimbus became the company's obsession, Daniel made one decision that would later change everything. He filed the patent in his own name. Not because he didn't trust Grant, but because every mentor he ever had told him the same thing. Protect your work. Protect your ideas. So he did. Then he licensed the patent to Vextrotech under a simple agreement. An agreement that said he would remain directly involved with the project. At the time, Grant didn't blink. He signed it without a second thought. Back then, trust was easy. Back then, they were partners. They didn't know that years later. This small detail, this single act of self-protection, would become the hinge that the entire story turned on. Because Daniel wasn't just the inventor. He wasn't just an engineer from Ohio with big dreams. He was the owner of Nimbus. And while the world saw Grant as the shining face of Vextrotech, the truth was quietly written in black ink on legal paper. Waiting for the day it would matter. Waiting for the day someone would try to take everything Daniel built. And that day was coming soon. Grant didn't betray Daniel in one sudden moment. It didn't happen with a loud announcement or a dramatic argument. It started quietly, so quietly that Daniel almost missed the first signs. The first crack appeared during a routine Monday meeting. Daniel walked into the conference room with his laptop, ready to update the team on Nimbus. But when he stepped inside, everyone was already seated except for him. The slides were already on the screen. And Grant was at the front, speaking as if the meeting had begun long before Daniel even knew it was happening. "Glad you could join us." "Daniel," Grant said with a polite smile that didn't feel polite at all. Daniel froze for a moment. Why hadn't he gotten the meeting invite? Why was the project update happening without him? He brushed it off as a simple mistake. A calendar mix-up. A miscommunication. But it didn't stop there. Over the next week, more meetings took place. Without Daniel, he would find out from coworkers whispering in hallways or mentioning ideas that he had never heard about. Plans were being made behind closed doors, and he wasn't part of them. He asked Grant about it once, trying to keep his voice steady. "Hey, I noticed I wasn't included in a few calls. Everything okay?" Grant smiled too quickly. "Oh, nothing to worry about. We're just trying to streamline things. You've been overloaded. Thought we'd take some pressure off." Pressure off. That was the excuse, but Daniel didn't feel relieved. He felt replaced. Then came the second crack, much deeper. One afternoon, Daniel walked into the lab to find another engineer, Ethan, working on the Nimbus interface. Ethan was talented but inexperienced, still learning the system Daniel had spent years shaping. "Grant asked me to take over the visuals," Ethan said quietly, like he knew something was off. "Take over?" Why would Grant make changes without even talking to Daniel? Daniel stared at the screen, noticing that someone had already adjusted part of the design poorly. It wasn't broken, but it was different from the careful structure he'd perfected. Still, he didn't say anything. He didn't want to look paranoid. He didn't want to believe Grant was pushing him aside. But soon, the third crack formed. Emails began to feel colder. Shorter, filtered. If Daniel sent a message, Grant's reply came hours later, sometimes through an assistant, sometimes through another engineer. As if someone else had to speak on Grant's behalf. And conversations in the hallway? Different, distant. People stopped making eye contact. They lowered their voices when Daniel passed, like they knew something he didn't. It felt like a slow, quiet freeze settling over the entire company. But Daniel wasn't the kind of man to jump to conclusions. He told himself it was temporary, that it was stress, that Grant was overwhelmed with the upcoming launch. He convinced himself things would return to normal, but they didn't. As the launch date grew closer, the tension grew too. Plans changed without warning. Deadlines shifted, and every decision seemed to move further away from Daniel's control. The moment that hurt the most came during a team check-in. Grant stood at the front of the room, hands in his pockets, speaking confidently about Nimbus, using words Daniel once used, describing ideas Daniel once explained. But Grant spoke as if they came from him. And worst of all, the team nodded along. For the first time since he joined Vextrotech, Daniel felt like a stranger in his own project, a guest in the thing he built, a shadow in a room where he used to be the core. He tried to stay hopeful. He reminded himself of the years of partnership, the late nights, the victories he and Grant shared. Surely those memories meant something. Surely Grant wouldn't betray him for something as simple as fame. But deep down, Daniel felt something shift. A quiet realization he didn't want to admit. Something was happening behind his back. Something intentional. Something carefully planned. And whatever it was getting closer. The cracks were no longer small. They were widening, spreading through everything Daniel worked for. And he knew, though he didn't want to believe it that soon, something was going to break. The betrayal landed on a Thursday morning. A day that should have been ordinary, but became the moment everything shattered. Daniel stepped into the boardroom, expecting another update on the launch. Instead, he walked into a room filled with stiff faces, quiet whispers, and a tension so heavy it felt like the walls were listening. Grant stood at the head of the table, hands folded, wearing a smile that didn't belong in the room. A rehearsed smile. A smile that told Daniel something bad was about to happen. "Daniel," Grant said, gesturing toward an empty chair. "Please sit." Daniel didn't sit. Something in his chest tightened. He stayed standing. Grant cleared his throat and looked around at the board. Then he said the words that knocked the air out of the room, effective immediately. "We're moving forward without Daniel's involvement." Just like that. No explanation. No discussion. No respect. Daniel felt the world tilt for a moment. He looked at the board, people he'd worked with for years, but none of them met his eyes. One of them even looked down, like he couldn't bear to witness the moment. "What are you talking about?" Daniel finally asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Nimbus is my project. I've led it from day one." Grant nodded, calm, too calm. "And we thank you for that," he replied, as if offering a compliment. "But the company needs a different direction now. Fresh leadership. Fresh leadership." Another polished phrase meant to bury someone quietly. Daniel shook his head. "You're replacing me?" Right before the launch, Grant exhaled softly, the way people do when they pretend they're doing the right thing. "It's what's best for Vextrotech." But everyone in the room knew it wasn't about the company. It was about Grant, the spotlight, the stage, the story he wanted to tell. And Daniel wasn't part of that story anymore. A silence fell over the room, cold, unkind, humiliating. Daniel realized no one was going to step in. No one was going to defend him. No one was going to say the truth out loud. Grant looked at him with a face full of false sympathy. "You'll be paid for your time, of course. And we wish you the best. Wish you the best." The phrase people use when they're shutting a door in your face. Daniel didn't argue. He didn't yell. He didn't give Grant the satisfaction of seeing him break. He simply gathered the few items he had in the office, packed them into a cardboard box, and walked out with his head low and his chest heavy. Every step down the hallway felt like a goodbye he never agreed to. By the time he reached his car, the humiliation had turned into something worse: heartbreak. He had given everything to Vextrotech. All the long nights, all the ideas, all the sacrifices. And Grant had taken all of it. With a smile, Daniel sat in the driver's seat for almost an hour, staring at the steering wheel, letting the silence swallow him. He didn't know what hurt more, losing the job or losing a friend he thought he could trust. Then his phone buzzed. It was a message from a tech journalist he knew. Just one line. "Hey, heard Grant is presenting Nimbus as his creation at the launch. Congrats to him, I guess." Daniel read the message twice. His heart pounded. A slow shock spread through him like cold water. Presenting Nimbus as his. Grant wasn't just removing Daniel. He was stealing the invention, claiming the work, erasing the one person who made Nimbus possible. And suddenly, the pieces fell into place. The secret meetings, the distant messages, the changed responsibilities, the cold stares. Grant hadn't pushed Daniel out because of new direction. He pushed him out because he wanted the glory, the recognition that never belonged to him. In that moment, Daniel felt the heartbreak harden into something sharper. Not anger, not rage. Something quieter, but far more powerful. Grant thought he had won. Grant thought he had the upper hand. Grant thought Daniel was out of the picture. But Grant forgot one thing. Daniel owned the patent. And as Daniel sat there in the dim light of the parking garage, he realized something. The betrayal wasn't the end of the story. It was the start of a reckoning. Grant had taken his pride. But Daniel still held the one thing Grant needed most. And soon, Grant was going to find out what happens when you underestimate the man who built everything. Daniel didn't sleep the night he was fired. He sat at his kitchen table long after midnight, the room quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. His cardboard box from the office sat beside him, filled with notebooks, old prototypes, and reminders of a life he never thought he'd lose. But Daniel wasn't thinking about the humiliation anymore. He wasn't thinking about the sting of being pushed out, or the ache of betrayal. He was thinking about one thing: the patent. He reached into the box and pulled out an old folder. Edges worn, pages slightly bent from years of handling. He opened it slowly, like it held the answer to every question tormenting him. And there it was, clear, unmistakable. A document he had filed long before the company had money. Before the investors, before Grant stepped into the spotlight. U.S. patent. Owner, Daniel Carter, not co-owner. Not Vextrotech property. Just him. He skimmed the terms again, even though he knew them by heart. Nimbus was licensed to the company under one condition, that Daniel would remain directly involved in the project's development, but Grant had removed him publicly, proudly, which meant the company had broken the agreement. Daniel leaned back in his chair, feeling something he hadn't felt in days: control. While Grant was busy stealing the spotlight, he had forgotten the most important rule in innovation. The creator always leaves a trail. Daniel grabbed his phone and dialed a number he never thought he'd need again: his old intellectual property attorney, Mark Harrington. Mark had helped him file the Nimbus patent years ago. The call connected after 2 rings. Daniel? It's been a while. Everything all right? Daniel took a quiet breath. Not really. I need your help. He explained everything: how he'd been removed, how the company planned to launch without him, how Grant was presenting Nimbus as his own idea. There was a long pause on the other end. Then Mark spoke, his tone sharper now. Daniel, this is serious. They can't legally launch Nimbus without your permission. I know, Daniel said softly. I need to make sure they understand that. Send me the documents, Mark replied. All of them. Don't worry, we'll handle this. Within the hour, Daniel uploaded every file, every agreement, every signature. He paced the living room as he waited, checking his phone every few minutes. His nerves buzzed, not with fear, but with anticipation. This wasn't revenge out of anger. This was justice: quiet, precise, and overdue. When Mark finally called back, his voice held a hint of disbelief. Daniel, you have full control. They violated the agreement the second they pushed you out. We can stop the launch, completely. Daniel closed his eyes. Relief washed through him: calm, steady, powerful, not loud. Not dramatic. Just right. Together, they drafted a legal notice, firm, professional, impossible to ignore. It stated that without Daniel's direct involvement, Nimbus could not be displayed, discussed, or launched in any public setting. If Vextrotech attempted to move forward, Daniel reserved the right to seek an injunction strong enough to shut the entire launch down. And the timing? Perfect. Grant's big event was only days away. The notice was addressed to the company, the board, and directly to Grant Morgan. No anger. No threat-filled language, just truth. Cold, simple truth. After sending it, Daniel didn't celebrate. He didn't brag. He didn't tell anyone. He simply waited, quietly, patiently. He knew Grant would panic. He knew the board would scramble. He knew the legal team would confirm what Grant had forgotten. Daniel owned Nimbus. Not just in spirit, in law. As the countdown to the launch got shorter, Daniel felt something unusual. Peace. For the first time since the betrayal, he knew he wasn't the powerless one. He wasn't the victim. He was the one holding the final move. The one piece of the puzzle Grant couldn't steal. And soon, very soon, Grant would learn what happens when you underestimate the man who built the foundation you're standing on. The clock was ticking. And Daniel was ready. The morning of the launch felt like the start of a festival. Bright lights, giant screens, reporters with cameras, investors in sharp suits. Everyone was buzzing with excitement. Vextrotech had turned a downtown convention hall into a futuristic stage, complete with smoke effects, music, and massive displays of Nimbus rotating on giant LED walls. To the world, this was the day Grant Morgan would shine. The day he would introduce a groundbreaking invention. The day he would stand at the center of attention. But to Daniel, it was the day justice was finally going to speak. He stood at the very back of the venue, blending into the crowd. No one noticed him. He wasn't there to cause a scene. He wasn't there to interrupt. He was there for one reason only: to watch the truth unfold. Backstage, Grant looked like a man ready to claim the world. Hair styled, suit perfect, speech memorized. He checked himself in the mirror, rehearsing the lines he'd practiced for weeks. Nimbus isn't just technology. It's vision. He almost believed the words himself. Then a staff member rushed toward him, pale, breathless, holding an envelope. "Mr. Morgan, this came for you." They said, "It's urgent." Grant frowned, tore it open, and unfolded the letter. As he read, the color drained from his face. His confident smile slid off like melting ice. The letter was short, direct, unmistakable. The launch was blocked. Nimbus could not be shown, mentioned, displayed, or promoted. Not without Daniel's direct involvement. Not without violating the patent agreement. Grant stared at the page as if it were a trap. He motioned for the legal team. "Tell me this is wrong. Tell me this is a mistake." But the lawyers didn't rush. They walked in slowly, each one reading the notice with growing concern. Finally, one of them looked up. "Grant, this is legitimate. We can't move forward." Grant's voice cracked. "What do you mean we can't move forward? We have investors, press, live streams. The whole industry is watching." The lawyer swallowed. "If you present Nimbus today, Daniel can file an injunction. The courts will respond immediately. We could face serious consequences." Consequences. A word Grant never liked to hear. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing in circles. This can't be happening today. Not today. But it was happening. Every second brought him closer to the moment he had dreamed of and now feared. The event director rushed in. "Grant, you're on in 3 minutes. Cameras are rolling." Grant looked at the giant screen showing the countdown. 2:59, 2:58. Panic rose in him like a sudden wave. His breathing grew shallow. His hands trembled. He tried to think. He tried to find a shortcut. He tried to imagine a version of the speech that didn't involve Nimbus, but without Nimbus. He had nothing. The countdown hit 0. The stage lights blasted on. The audience cheered. Music boomed through the speakers. Grant stepped out, blinded by spotlights, sweat already forming on his forehead. He stared at the crowd, rows of cameras pointed straight at him, streaming to thousands watching online. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He tried again. Still nothing. The silence stretched, growing louder with every passing second. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Investors shifted in their seats. Journalists raised eyebrows. Grant forced himself to speak. "There are technical issues," he muttered, but he couldn't explain them. He couldn't hide them. He couldn't escape them. He stood there, frozen, exposed, powerless, as the event unraveled. People whispered. Reporters took notes. Some even recorded on their phones, capturing the moment the confident CEO broke in front of the world. Within minutes, the event director signaled to shut everything down. Lights dimmed. Music cut off. The launch collapsed. There was no applause. No celebration. Just confusion. Turning into embarrassment. Turning into headlines that would follow Grant for years. And at the back of the room, Daniel watched quietly. No smile. No gloating. Just calm understanding. Grant had tried to take his creation. Grant had tried to erase him, but the truth had a way of speaking at the perfect moment. And today, it spoke louder than any speech Grant could have given. The launch day was supposed to be Grant's victory. Instead, it became the day he was exposed. And Daniel walked out of the venue knowing one thing. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. And still leaves the world speechless. The fallout began faster than anyone expected. Within hours of the failed launch, the headlines spread across every tech site, business blog, and social feed. Reporters who attended the event didn't hold back. They described the silence on stage, the confusion, the panic, the sudden shutdown of the entire presentation. But the most damaging stories came next. Whispers became articles. Articles became investigations. Investigations became full-blown exposure. One headline read, "Sources claim Vextrotech removed the original inventor before launch." Another, "Internal conflict behind Nimbus collapse. Where is the real creator?" Journalists began reaching out to engineers, former employees, even investors. And slowly, piece by piece, the truth started to appear in public view. Anonymous staff admitted that Daniel had been pushed aside. Others mentioned strange meetings and sudden changes inside the company. The board of directors had no choice. They had to hold an emergency meeting. The pressure from investors was intense. Stockholders demanded answers. Partners threatened to back out, and then someone leaked Daniel's legal notice. Not the whole document, just enough to prove one thing. Vextrotech had violated the patent agreement. The board wasn't just shocked. They were furious. Behind closed doors, they confronted Grant. They asked why he removed Daniel. They asked why he hid the patent issue. They asked why the company now stood on the edge of disaster. Grant tried to defend himself. He blamed stress. He blamed pressure. He blamed miscommunication. But the truth was staring them in the face. He had pushed out the inventor. He had claimed credit. He had risked the entire company on a secret he hoped would never come to light. Within 48 hours, the decision was made. Grant Morgan was asked to resign. Not quietly. Not politely. He was escorted out of the building with a short statement sent to the press, effective immediately. Vextrotech will undergo leadership restructuring to restore integrity and trust. The world knew what that meant. Grant's fall was complete, but something bigger still needed to happen. The company reached out to Daniel. The board chair called him personally, a call filled with apologies, heavy breaths, and regret that sounded years late. "Daniel," she said softly, "we can't change what happened, but we can fix what happens next. Nimbus cannot succeed without you, and the company needs you back." Daniel listened quietly. Not with anger. Not with triumph, with clarity. He didn't ask for revenge. He didn't demand payback. He simply said, "If I come back, it has to be my way. My team, my launch." There was no hesitation. "Of course," she replied. "Whatever you need." And just like that, Daniel walked back into the building he once left in heartbreak. But this time, the atmosphere was different. People stood when he entered. Engineers welcomed him with relieved smiles. Even those who once avoided eye contact met his gaze with respect. The truth had restored something that betrayal tried to destroy. Weeks later, Nimbus had its real launch built on honesty. Not ego. The event wasn't flashy like Grant's version. No smoke machines, no dramatic music, no grand speeches. Just Daniel standing on a clean stage, holding the device he built with his own hands. He spoke simply, clearly, without theatrics. This project started as a dream, something meant to help, not to divide. Today, it finally gets the chance it deserves. The audience listened with full attention. Reporters took notes, but this time, their expressions were warm. Investors nodded with approval. And the applause that followed wasn't forced, it was real. Nimbus launched successfully, praised for its innovation and purpose. And Daniel finally recognized wasn't the man pushed aside anymore. He was the creator, the leader, the man whose quiet persistence exposed the truth. As the event ended, someone asked him how he felt after everything. Daniel smiled gently. "Sometimes," he said, "justice doesn't show up fast. But when it does, it restores more than it takes away." And in that moment, he knew the story wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, about resilience, about the power of standing firm when the world tries to rewrite your place in it. Daniel had returned, not defeated, but stronger. And the world finally saw him for who he was, the man who built Nimbus, and the man who refused to let anyone take it from him. Some endings are loud. Some endings shake the earth, break friendships, or leave people shattered. But Daniel's ending wasn't loud at all. It was calm, quiet, steady, like the moment just after a storm, when the air feels different and the world finally makes sense again. Because when everything was over, when the truth came out, Daniel realized something he never expected. The deepest betrayal often comes from the people you trust the most. Grant wasn't a stranger. He wasn't a rival. He was someone Daniel once called a friend. Someone he built dreams with, worked beside, trusted with ideas that meant everything to him. And yet, that same person was the one who tried to erase him. For a long time, Daniel asked himself the same question. How could someone so close twist something so important? How could someone you believed in try to take the very thing you poured your heart into? The answer wasn't simple, but the lesson was, betrayal doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives in whispers, in hidden meetings, in quiet decisions made behind closed doors. But what truly matters is not the betrayal itself. It's how you rise after it. Daniel realized something powerful during the weeks after the failed launch. He didn't need to argue. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to fight fire with fire. He had something far stronger: preparation, integrity, truth. Years earlier, when he filed that patent in his name, he didn't do it because he expected betrayal. He did it because he believed in protecting his work. He believed in doing the right thing, even when no one was watching. And that simple act, that moment of foresight, became the shield that saved everything. His quiet preparation spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. In the end, Daniel didn't destroy Grant's career. Grant destroyed his own by forgetting the one rule every leader should remember: you can't build a future on lies. Not forever. Daniel's revenge wasn't loud or dramatic. He didn't storm into rooms or demand apologies. His revenge was quiet, professional, strong. It was the kind of justice that arrives without raising its voice. The kind that exposes the truth simply by standing firm. Because the truth doesn't need permission. The truth doesn't need a spotlight. The truth doesn't crumble under pressure. The truth waits. And when the right moment comes, it rises. As Nimbus finally launched under Daniel's leadership, he didn't feel proud in a loud, boastful way. He felt something softer: relief, peace, clarity. He had reclaimed not just his invention, but his story, his future, his sense of self-worth. People congratulated him, shook his hand, praised his work. But the greatest victory wasn't the applause. It was the moment Daniel realized he no longer felt the weight of the betrayal. It no longer controlled him. It no longer followed him like a shadow. He had stepped out of it and stepped toward a better path. Standing backstage after the successful launch, he looked down at Nimbus in his hands. A device built from late nights, hope, doubt, sacrifice, and faith in something bigger than betrayal. A reporter asked him softly, "After everything you went through, what would you tell someone facing the same thing?" Daniel thought for a long moment. Then he spoke words he himself had needed to hear months earlier. Protect your work. Protect your peace. And trust that integrity will outlast any lie. Because that was the heart of his journey. He didn't win because he was louder. He didn't win because he fought harder. He won because he stayed true to his work, to his values, to the truth that never stopped being his biggest ally. In the end, betrayal didn't break Daniel. It shaped him. It sharpened him. It led him back to himself. And walking out of that building different than the day he left it, he finally understood. Revenge doesn't always come through anger. Sometimes the strongest revenge is reclaiming the life someone tried to take from you. Thanks for staying with this story. If it hit home, if you've ever been betrayed or underestimated, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay close. There are more powerful stories coming your way.